Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The Crivari didn't send a message. They dropped their envoy naked and shivering onto the carbexite fields, breathing through a methane mask too small for his mandibles. The poor creature staggered across the salt bed in ceremonial posture, back limbs dragging, thorax exposed, antennae crusted with frost from the orbital drop. 2 human miners found him twitching next to Rig 6. By the time Rovarnet arrived, the exosuit crew had pulled him into the blast shelter and locked down oxygen levels to non-lethal. He stood there, watching the Crivari press a gland-marked contract tube into the floor like it was sacred scripture. It hissed open. The translation scrolled across the far wall in red. Effective immediately. 90% of all carbexite extraction shall be surrendered to the Crivari Conclave. Minimum yield, 400 metric tons annually. Failure to comply within 1 rotational cycle will forfeit planetary tenancy. All oxygen rights revoked. The envoy didn't wait for a reply. He inhaled once through his cracked mask, performed a warbling trill of dismissal, and convulsed to death on the floor. Varnet didn't move. He just stared at the steaming body until the twitching stopped, then looked down at the miners. "Cut the bastard's mask off," he said. "I want it framed." The core chamber lights flickered as Rovarnet stepped into the command dome. The place still smelled like the last emergency patch job, metal scorched from rig shutdowns, burnt poly from the recycled wiring. He moved past engineering staff and into the CIC without a word. The council was waiting. 12 people, 2 from each sector, none of them elected. On Velmara, leadership wasn't a position. It was a sentence. "Tell me it's a bluff," said Captain Holst, arms crossed, still in dust gear. "We've got 11 rigs functional. Even if we reroute coolant feeds, we'd melt the alloy cores inside a week." "It's not a bluff," Varnet said. 400 tons? They know that's suicide. They know exactly what it is. Varnet stepped closer, voice flat. "They're not escalating. They're evicting. The Conclave never expected us to survive on Velmara this long. They figured the CO2 would kill us, or the rock, or each other. You're saying this is a reset. I'm saying this was never about minerals." He pointed to the wall display, a map of carbexite veins, extraction yields, and the current planetary atmosphere spread. This was about leverage. We're squatters who became suppliers. Now we're suppliers who became a liability. "They can't use Velmara. Their drones melt trying to extract a kilo." "They don't have to use it. They just have to lease it to something that will." Silence. Then Councillor Dre spoke, voice thin. "We could evacuate, break down the rigs, salvage what we can." Varnet turned. "We leave, we lose the only O2-rich rock in this quadrant. We lose carbexite control. We lose the message." "What message?" "That humans don't pay to breathe." The rig fields were quiet that night. Varnet walked them alone, dust biting at his boots. The distant hum of turbine cannons silenced for maintenance. The wind carried the scent of metal and methane. The dead envoy still hung in the air somewhere. He passed Rig 4 and ran a hand along its spine. Each rig had a name etched on the control plate. Not factory numbers, names. Because the people who built them knew what they were. Survival. And now they were being asked to burn them, just to meet a quota that wasn't real. Varnet reached the perimeter fence and keyed the uplink to the only AI left running. A small mining assistant core, patched beyond warranty, built for load balancing and heat monitoring. He'd rewritten its subroutines 2 years ago, quietly. "Confirm project burn switch authorization," he said. The AI paused. "Acknowledged. Local overrides initiated. Select rigs armed for sabotage, awaiting final sync next morning." The first Crivari orbital scanner breached Velmara's upper air. It hovered low, heat-shielded, high-spectrum visual sweep, no comms. A threat by silence, a show of power. They were watching. Sector 3 miners gathered in silence under the rig tower as it passed. Nobody spoke. Ro Varnet stood beside the carbexite hauler as the scanner pulsed across their camp. He looked up once, then keyed into his uplink. Rig 2 went up in a clean column of fire, silent, sharp, surgical. The scanner snapped sideways, confused, too slow. It caught the tail end of the explosion just in time to record the rig collapsing into itself, melting down through the carbexite shaft it had been assigned to overdraw. 3 hours later, the Conclave sent their reply. It came on the emergency frequency. No pleasantries. No formal cast mark. Just a killcast directive in pure trade dialect. Your tenancy is void. You have violated breath right. Prepare for reclamation. Varnet listened to it twice. Then he smirked. In the command dome, Ro pulled off his gloves and slammed them onto the console. Start moving families underground. Rigs 3, 7, and 9 are cleared for fallback weaponization. Patch the AI into rig hydraulics and pull atmospheric reads every 6 minutes. I want to know exactly how much vaporized carbexite we can push into the upper thermals before this place becomes unholy. You're serious? Holst said. Varnet looked at him. You think I'm burning our way out? He pointed to the Crust map again, an updated overlay with detonation points, projected wind shear, and oxygen flow lines. I'm not burning our way out. I'm making it so no one walks in after we're gone. Back on the rig field, a Crivari scout drone dipped too low. One of the miners, Dal, grease-covered and exhausted, spun a power coupler into its rotors like a throwing knife. The drone crashed into a carbexite mound and detonated, half-cooked and screeching. Dal didn't say a word. He walked over, smashed what was left with a rebreather tank, then went back to work. That night, Varnet stood alone outside the dome. The stars over Velmara looked like cracks in a shell, beautiful and false. Somewhere beyond them, the Crivari Conclave was already loading transports, preparing reclamation teams, ready to retake the world they never touched. He lit a torch, dragged it across the broken surface of Rig 2's wreckage, and etched one sentence into the metal. You tried to tax our air. He set the torch down, and then he waited for war. They came without a fleet. That was the first sign the Crivari weren't here to negotiate. No battle formation, no comms hail. Just a precision drop of 12 heat-shielded pods, each descending in perfect silence onto the crust of Velmara like they'd done it before. The rigs weren't active. The sky was clear. They thought it would be clean. Ro Varnet watched from the primary dome as the drops landed outside Sector 3. He leaned over the live feed, thermal overlay running hot, audio tracking screeches of descent, and spoke without turning his head. Status on the explosives? Rigs 3 and 9 are armed and synced to proximity det, said Entek Braun. We welded the charges into the shaft columns. Total core failure on detonation. Blast radius puts 30 meters of carbexite vapor into the wind. Wind speed? North-northeast, toward their staging point. Good. He watched the first Crivari disembark, 7 feet tall, high cast armor reflecting light like bone dipped in oil. They moved in perimeter formation, ritual spacing, mandibles flexing slow in unison. Not for function, for posture. Still using ceremony in a kill zone, Ro muttered. Idiots. The Crivari reclamation unit advanced on the wreckage of Rig 2. They didn't pause to scan it. That was beneath them. The lead cast warrior, identified by double sigils on the thorax, stepped over the melted rig housing and activated a territorial beacon. It screeched a challenge frequency in low chem. Below their feet, the charge inside the rig clicked live. The remains of Rig 2 erupted in silence. No fire, just a pressure blast that shoved raw carbexite dust into the air like a shrapnel cloud. The Kravari dropped instantly. Their armor could take the blast, but not the air that followed. Ro turned from the feed. Record their vitals. I want data on how fast it hits them when unfiltered. Entech Braun didn't ask why. Underground, the old mechanics bay had been converted into a war room. Welded tables, chemical printers, and what was left of their deep core alloy reserves, stacked and cataloged like gold bars from a failed empire. That's all of it? Ro asked. Everything we've got that isn't welded into a rig, said Holst. Carbeck's alloy yield, 22 tons. And how many rigs we'd need to hit 400 tons this year? 47. They both looked at the wall screen, Velmara's current operational count. 11. It wasn't even close. You can't rebuild them fast enough, Ro said. Not without using the very mineral we need to mine. Which makes the decree a no-win. Ro nodded. It's a trap. And the alloy's the bait. The Kravari doctrine wasn't just warfare. It was rhythm. Predictability dressed as ritual. Everything had a shape, a cadence, a cast mark for what was allowed and what wasn't. That's what made them vulnerable. They believed carbexite was only dangerous in the ground or in the refinery. They didn't think a human would extract it just to poison the wind. It violated their doctrine. It wasn't proper. Ro had no use for proper. 2 days later, the Kravari sent a transmission. The face of the cast mark envoy flickered across the dome. Its voice came through on the formal tone band, trilling and layered. This planetary airspace is under Kravari Reclamation Authority. Your refusal to evacuate constitutes species-grade defiance. As per caste decree, you are to be removed, with or without consent. Ro didn't respond. He just cut the feed. On the edge of Sector 5, a group of ex-miners were repurposing drill arms into pressure lance mortars. One of them, Hendricks, had been a welder for 15 years. He wiped sweat off his face, checked the makeshift shell loader, and slapped it twice. "Still think we're leaving?" someone asked him. "Nah," Hendricks said, grinning through the grime. "I think we're making sure they don't stay." The next Kravari unit dropped near the old excavation line. Smaller team. Test group. This time the humans didn't detonate a rig. They watched. The Kravari moved slower. They scanned. They altered spacing. One used a new filtration mask, sleeker than before. They were adapting. Not fast enough, but they were learning. Ro took notes. "We'll need to accelerate. Start configuring the extractor arms as dispersal rigs. Vapor-only loads. Use the dummy shafts." "That'll leave nothing behind," Holst warned. "Even if we win, we won't be able to mine for years." "Good." Holst blinked. "You're trying to make Velmara worthless?" "I'm trying to make it unusable." That night, Ro stood near the burned-out chassis of Rig 9, staring at the stars beyond the poison glare. The sky looked empty, but it wasn't. "They'll send more," he said. "Let them," said Dal, the drone killer, walking up with a modified suit core in one hand. "We're not a colony anymore. We're a warning." Ro didn't answer. He just looked out past the horizon, toward the next dust line where the Kravari were staging. "Deploy the alloy trap," he said. Dal nodded. It was time to show them what happened when you built machines out of the same metal you refused to surrender. The Kravari tried to take the rigs. The humans detonated the crust. They tried to adapt. The humans turned their own doctrine into a noose. The cost of breathing was rising, and the Kravari hadn't even seen the bill yet. The next day, the Kravari drop pods came in low and dirty. No ceremony, no staggered descent. Just raw gravitational aggression. 12 armored canisters hitting Velmara's crust like hammer blows, cratering the salt-flat perimeter outside Sector 3. No envoy. No message. Just war. "They're not scanning anymore," Braun said, eyes locked on the surface feed. "Just boots on ground. They're assuming we're buried already." Ro Varnett stood over the CIC's tactical table, stripped down to his undersuit, helmet hanging by his side. He hadn't slept in 40 hours. Nobody had. "How many?" he asked. "3 full squads, combat rated." Braun paused. "No filtration gear." Rowe nodded. "They're testing their new mask tech, betting they can survive long enough to hit a rig before the vapor cooks them." Holst grunted. "That means they're desperate." "No," Rowe said. "It means they think we are." The new Kravari strike teams moved fast. They fanned out across the flat like they were taking a city. Not a collection of cratered rigs and half-dead HAB modules. Their formation wasn't clean anymore. Their posture was tighter, less ritual, more kill-zone instinct. They'd learned, but not fast enough. Rowe keyed the uplink. Trigger 9. On the far edge of Sector 3, what remained of Rig 9 belched raw vapor into the open air, compressed carbexite detonating in a chemical bloom so thick it painted the wind. The Kravari nearest the blast tried to pull back, but the lead caste warrior's shroud faltered, his armor vented, and he screamed. It wasn't a war cry, it was agony. Inside the war room, Hendricks slid another makeshift charge onto the table. 3 more extractor arms re-rigged for dispersal, pressures holding at 60%. Dal handed him a canister, silent as always. "You ready for the push?" Hendricks asked him. Dal just nodded. His knuckles were scraped raw from wrenchwork. Rowe passed behind him, giving a silent glance of acknowledgement. No words. They knew what was coming. Hours later, Sector 2 was hit. This time, the Kravari didn't drop pod. They breached from below. A tunneling drone, long-range, bore class, pierced the crust like a syringe and ejected 3 caste killers into the lower chamber. One of them died instantly to an air spike trap rigged by Holst. The other 2 made it into the secondary mining shaft. They killed 7 before Dal's team arrived. It was the first time anyone on Velmara saw a Kravari warrior fight without hesitation. No posture, no challenge screech, just motion, lethal, fast, multi-limbed, cutting through humans like they were equations. Dal didn't posture either. He caught one in a hydraulic press line and crushed it. The second went down when Hendricks detonated a fuel cell in the adjacent corridor, melting the thing's outer carapace into the rock. Afterward, they bagged the bodies, studied the armor, and found something new. "Look at this," Braun said, tapping the Kravari filtration system. "It's custom, hybrid filtration tech, our design patterns. They're copying our thermal dispersal filters. They've been watching us for years," Rowe said, "waiting to adapt." Holst looked up. "You think it's Ulak?" Rowe just gave a vague shift of his head. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no. Later that cycle, a long-wave transmission slipped through the static. Narrowband, caste encoded, tagged with a crest none of them had seen before. Braun decrypted it. It wasn't a broadcast. It was surveillance data. Velmara's layout, civilian shelters, rig maps, dispersal node coordinates. It was all there. "They know everything," Holst said. "No," Rowe replied. "One of them does." He looked at the transmission tag again. Ulk Vel Tras 01. Atmospheric Reclaim Order. Strike threshold authorized. That name became gospel in the dome within an hour. Ulak Veltras, a Kravari dominance caste strategist, reclamation warden, a war planner specialized in retaking oxygen-rich planets deemed aberrant to caste evolution. Rowe stood before the marked-up rig map and circled the 3 deepest carbexite shafts. He's going to target these. If he takes them, he controls the crust pressure, cuts off vapor dispersion, forces us into static defense. Holst stepped forward. "Then we make those shafts the last thing he touches." The contract itself had been stored in Dome 1's archive since the first landing. A vacuum-sealed tube, laced with caste mark glands, ritual seals layered on its surface like something religious. It had survived half a century. Rowe opened it with a plasma cutter. The others watched in silence as he laid the charred pieces across the floor, and drove a pickaxe through them, deep enough to bite into the dome's foundation. "We breathe because we built this," he said, "not because we begged." And then he turned to Hendricks. "Take it to the wreckage of Rig 6. Burn it there. Let them see." The footage went live that same cycle. A drone hovered over the shattered hull of Rig 6, broadcasting to every frequency the Crivari ever used to demand tribute. Hendricks stood there with the remnants of the treaty, torch in hand, and set it alight on a pile of broken alloy. When the flames caught, the drone pulled back, wide angle. The words had been painted into the dust with fuel markers. "The contract is ash. This planet breathes us." Ulak responded within the hour. A new drop. 6 pods. Smaller, thinner, filled with a dense methane-based mist. No caste warriors, only drones. Dozens of them, and not the old recon types. These were cutters, extractor class, bladed limbs, spine-mounted saws. They weren't here to reclaim. They were here to dismember. They struck Dome 2 first. The first alarm didn't even register. By the time a tech shouted breach, the cutters were already slicing through the outer corridor. A dozen civilians died before the response team arrived. Rowe didn't wait. He hit the emergency override, slammed the dome's internal pressure seal, cut the entire section off, and vented it to surface air. Raw, unfiltered, poisoned with carbexite vapor. The drones went still in seconds. So did 4 humans still inside. Holst stared at him. "You didn't even flinch." Rowe met his eyes. Neither did Ulak when he sent them. Dal found a Crivari scout 5 clicks from the primary dome, alone, wounded, trying to crawl toward a signal mast. He didn't kill it fast. He broke its legs first, let it thrash in the oxygen while he stared down at its mandibles, the mask clamped tight to its face like a muzzle. Then he slit the seal and watched. "Message sent?" Hendricks asked him later. Dal didn't answer. He just handed over the scout's cast ID and walked back into the dust. 3 hours later, Rowe called the War Council. He didn't stand at the table. He stood at the viewport, staring out at the salt-cracked land that used to be a mining colony and was now a graveyard in progress. "We have 3 cycles left," he said. "Maybe less. Ulak's going to keep sending cutters, keep testing filters, keep trying to find a way to sterilize the atmosphere without setting off the crust." "No one's coming to help," Holst said. "We never expected them to," Rowe replied. "We didn't come here with an army. We came here to work. That's why they think we'll fold." He turned back. "But they forgot something." Braun leaned forward. "What's that?" Rowe's voice was quiet, steady. "We never stopped building. We just stopped telling them what it was for." The Crust War began in silence, not with gunfire or orbital strikes, or an ultimatum in Crivari script. Just a flicker in the atmosphere, barely visible, a shimmer across the horizon where the rigs used to stand. And then came the noise. Low, rhythmic, industrial. They were boiling the sky. "They're injecting sterilizers," Braun muttered, fingers racing over the console. "Modified dispersal drones, dumping chemical counteragents straight into the upper thermals." "Neutralizing the carbexite vapor?" Holst asked. "Trying to. It won't clear what we've already seeded, but it'll make future burns useless." Rowe Varnett said nothing. He stood over the tactical map, arms folded, jaw tight. "They're not clearing the air for conquest," he said. "They're prepping it for torch protocol." Hendricks looked up from the alloy rig schematics. "You mean they're gonna wipe the whole crust?" "No." Rowe turned, voice flat. "They're gonna kill the planet and lease the corpse." In the field, Sector 5 had become a trench zone. Miners turned fighters worked by torchlight, welding old rig frames into barricades. Carbexite loaders were reconfigured into airburst launchers. Even the rig fuel tanks, once strictly regulated, were now laced with contact charges. Every foot of ground had a cost. Dal worked the slope in silence, dragging razor wire across the ash-coated ground. His suit was torn, melted plating around the thigh where a Crivari cutter had struck him the day before. He shouldn't have been walking. He walked anyway. Then they found the drone, half buried, antennae twitching, still feeding telemetry to something in orbit. Dal didn't pause, didn't speak. They tore its limbs off, crammed the signal core with steel slag, and dropped it into a rigged mortar pipe. The shot arced high and hit home. 3 sterilizer drones blinked out in midair. Dal just stood there. Didn't flinch, didn't nod, just kept pulling wire. In Dome 1, Ro watched the satellite feed like a surgeon reading blood pressure. The Crivari sterilizer pattern was slow but precise. Each drone painted a swath of upper atmosphere with chemical compounds designed to bond with airborne carbexite, nullifying the toxic properties and forcing it to sediment. It was brilliant. It was devastating. It meant their primary weapon, Velmara's air, would soon be useless. Holst stepped forward. "We need to hit the source. Where are they launching from?" "Not orbit," Braun said. "They brought a forge pod, surface anchored. Southern Ridge." Ro nodded. "That's where we salt it." Velmara's southern ridge was slagged during the early settlement years. Too unstable to mine, too exposed to atmospheric storms. The Crivari had no reason to land there, until now. They'd carved a narrow channel into the ridge face, camouflaged, shielded. A forge pod half the size of the primary dome sat embedded in the rock, venting sterilizer canisters up through vertical shafts like chimneys. Braun ran the analysis. "We can't hit it from the dome, range too short, no direct line of sight." Ro tapped the map. "There's an old drilling tunnel beneath the ridge, abandoned after the quake 6 years ago." "You're not suggesting—" "I am. We load a dispersal bomb, route it through the tunnel, and cook the pod from underneath. It took 16 hours. Braun configured the payload. Hendricks scrounged enough active carbexite to make it viable. Dal and a 2-man team dragged the casing through 4 kilometers of unstable tunnel, crawling past collapsed beams, gas pockets, and Crivari sensor masts. No one spoke the entire way. At the final junction, Dal stopped. He checked the timer. 5 minutes. He pulled a fuel marker from his belt and scrawled 3 words on the casing. "Let it rot." Then he primed the charge and walked out without looking back. From Dome 1, they watched the feed. The forge pod went up like a dying star, white heat ripping through the ridge, carving it open from beneath. Chemical stores ignited. Ventilation shafts collapsed. The sterilizer drones blinked out of the sky one by one, their uplinks severed, guidance lost. The sky above Velmara began to churn again, slowly turning brown, then gray, then dense with vapor. The humans didn't cheer. They watched in silence. The next Crivari move was different. No drops, no sterilizers. Instead, they deployed the castless. It was doctrine violation, blasphemy, but they did it. 16 Crivari units, unmarked, unranked, born without caste and never given names. Loosed like hounds across the field, no armor, no filtration, just pure, suicidal muscle. They ran at the trenches screaming through shredded mandibles, dying in clouds of vapor and fire. But a few made it through. One reached Dome 2 and tore through the outer wall with its claws. Ro authorized the flamethrower units personally, burned the body until it fused with the floor. Braun monitored the Crivari relays afterward. "Ulak's desperate," he said. "He's abandoning doctrine to force a breakthrough." "Yes," Ro said, staring at the still-burning castless corpse. "He's escalating." The next message came direct, encrypted, targeted. Not to the dome's main frequency, but to Ro's personal uplink. "Varnet, you are no longer protected by contract. I will come myself, and I will not speak. I will breathe what kills me, until you do not." Holst read it over Ro's shoulder. "He's coming." Ro nodded. Then we salt the crust. That night, the humans detonated Rig 5. Not for defense, not for a kill zone, just for a message. They painted the blast crater with thermal markers and sent drones to broadcast it live. The pattern was clear. The words were simple. You are not evicting us. You are digging your own grave. The next day, Ulak landed. He came down on foot, wrapped in a pressure cloak laced with countervapors, shrouded in silence. He walked through the dead flats of Sector 4 like a priest crossing a burial field. Rowe watched from the tower. Don't kill him yet, he said. Hendricks looked confused. Why not? Because I want him to see what Velmara looks like when it's ours. Ulak waited, silent, visible through the vapor haze for hours. But Rowe never went out to meet him, never acknowledged the challenge. By nightfall, the Kravari warden turned and disappeared into the storm. They detonated every crust-facing shaft that night, not to fight. To poison. The wind screamed across the flats as carbexite vapor curled into the sky in dense, pulsing clouds. Velmara groaned, and the war became something else entirely. Not conquest, not resistance, but mutual extinction. The sun rose, but the sky stayed brown. Above Velmara, vapor trails curled like scars across the atmosphere, thick, unmoving, lit by the low red hue of a sun the Kravari couldn't look at without filters. Dome 1 hadn't seen clear light in 4 days. There was no more breathing without filters now. Not for them, not for the Kravari, not for anyone. In the rig graveyard outside Sector 4, the corpses didn't rot. They crystallized. The vapor calcified soft tissue, hardening limbs into statues mid-scream. 2 of the castless still knelt where they fell, mandibles frozen wide, lungs caved inward. Dal walked past them without looking. He was carrying tank cartridges toward the rig frame barricades. His left shoulder was wrapped in foil seal, red seeping through the gauze. He'd taken a glancing strike from one of the Kravari purge blades the day before. Didn't matter. The fight wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about keeping them from winning. Braun's voice crackled over the comms inside Dome 1. Carbexite levels have saturated the upper bands. No more air cycles possible. Filters only. Holst coughed. Even for the domes? Even here, we're officially past threshold. Anyone breathing unfiltered air is breathing death. Rowe didn't react. He was staring at the viewport again. Sector 2's line blinking red. Another breach. Deploy the cutter traps. No automated response. They want pressure. We give them silence. Braun frowned. They'll think we're gone. I know. The Kravari pushed harder that day. Their drones hit the tunnels first, carving through the crust with powerful saws, followed by cast warriors in hardened suits. Sleeker now, thinner filtration lines, coated in black mirrored resin that resisted vapor, seep. They moved like they knew the ground was already theirs. But they were wrong. Dal was waiting inside the collapse shaft, silent, still. When the lead cast warrior passed beneath the hanging beam, Dal cut the line and dropped 5 tons of rig frame alloy onto its spine. The Kravari collapsed without sound. The second didn't get that far. Dal met him head on. No ranged fire, no armor. Just a rebreather tank modified into a piston hammer, driven into the Kravari's thorax, with enough force to rupture both lungs. Carbexite hissed through the cracks as the alien's breath turned against itself. Dal stood over the body. Didn't move. Didn't clean the blood off his mask. In the dome, Hendricks stood beside Rowe, watching the vapor line move across the map. They'll breach by nightfall. I know, and we can't stop them. Rowe didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the red-marked sectors, every one of them soaked in cost. We can't stop them, he said, but we can make sure they understand what it took to come this far. Hendricks's jaw clenched, and what it'll cost to finish it. In the southern ridge, the wind turbines melted. The Kravari deployed a new agent, thermal flare charges designed to ignite carbexite residue and burn off residual vapor layers. It worked. But the fire didn't stay put. Rig 8 exploded. The fuel lines caught. The alloy structure collapsed. The entire southern trench filled with flame and black dust that coated lungs and sensors alike. Holst ran 2 teams out to seal the breach. 4 men didn't come back. Inside the comms chamber, Braun called it in. Flame front moving north. They're cleansing, not fighting. They're burning the crust. Rose stepped into the room, helmet clipped to his belt. Then we burn first. That night, they detonated Dome 3. It was empty, cleared the day before, but Rowe seeded the walls with vapor pods and sent a signal drone to hover over it. Let the Kravari watch. When the structure went, the sky turned the color of rust, and the wind blew the wrong way. Braun stared at the readings. They'll have to retreat. No filtration system can keep that out. Ulak will come back, Rowe said. Holst looked up. You sure? He's not after the rigs. He's after me. The next signal came direct to Rowe's uplink. Ulak's voice this time, hissing through damaged filters, unprocessed, raw. You bleed the world to prove you can. You stand in fumes and pretend it's power. We gave you rent. You built a tomb. Rowe typed his reply. No encryption. You gave us a tax on our breath. We paid. Now we collect. Ulak's response came without words. Another drop. This one wasn't a cast squad. It was a pod the size of a supply rig. When it landed, it didn't open. It hissed. And within seconds, the sky turned blue. Hendricks watched it from the wreck of Rig 2, coughing hard through his cracked filter. They're seeding blackout gas. Holst's voice came in through the comms. It's not a weapon. It's cover. Cover for what? Braun asked. Rowe didn't hesitate. Him. Ulak walked through the smoke like it was his birthright. No guards. No armor. Just that same cloak, now patched, scarred, woven with fresh cast-mark threads painted in red. Not a rank. A warning. Dal saw him first. He didn't attack. He radioed it in. Rowe suited up. They met in the open flats of Sector 3, dead rigs behind them, black wind tearing past, vapor thick enough to blind sensors. No one else was there. Just Rowe and Ulak. The Kravari warden towered over him, chest scarred, eyes visible through a cracked lens. He didn't speak, didn't challenge, just walked forward, slowly, as if Rowe were something to be stepped on. Rowe didn't flinch. He triggered the pressure switch under his boot. The entire flat detonated beneath them. Both were flung backward, Ulak crashing into rig debris, cloak on fire, Rowe rolling into the dirt, suit cracked along the shoulder. They both got up. That was the only rule. The fight wasn't clean. It wasn't tactical. It was brutal. Rowe swung a broken alloy strut. Ulak answered with claws. Blood hit the dust. Breath came in gasps, filtered through failing rebreathers. Every blow was slow, final, loud. No dialogue, no speech. Just two species trying to erase each other. And then Rowe drove the strut into Ulak's mask, shattering it, forcing the vapor in. Ulak screamed and fell. Rowe stood over him. Didn't speak. Didn't celebrate. Just stared as Ulak writhed in the dust, his lungs turning to acid in real time. Then Rowe turned, walked away. The Kravari stopped transmitting. Their units scattered. Some ran into the vapor and died. Others stayed still, awaiting commands that wouldn't come. And above it all, Velmara held its breath. In Dome 1, Holst watched Rowe pull his cracked suit off, blood running from a shoulder gash. Is it over? Rowe nodded once, tried to catch his breath. Then he stepped to the viewport and stared out at the sky. It was black, still, absolute. That day was the first in Velmara's history without a single breath of unfiltered air. the day without air. But it wasn't the day humans stopped breathing. It was the day they decided what was worth breathing for. Ulak's body lay in the vapor field for 3 days before the wind buried it. Not a single Kravari came to retrieve him. No honorites, no drones, no signal. Just the dust curling around his limbs and the acid in his chest cavity eating what was left. The crater where he fell stayed hot for a week. The metal beneath him warped from the heat of the blast. Kravari movements thinned. The patterns stopped making sense. No formations, no relays. Some units huddled near downed pods and suffocated in silence. Others walked aimless until they collapsed. Their doctrine hadn't planned for retreat, only for victory or death. Velmara gave them death. Dal was the first to notice the shift. He stood at the north trench with his scatter cutter, unmoving, for hours. Then he walked back into Dome 1, mask fogged, and placed the weapon on the floor. Didn't say a word. By the 6th day, Braun called it. No movement, no pulses, no orbital chatter. They're gone. Rowe looked at the board. Red lights everywhere, every rig, every sector, burned or buried. He tapped Sector 12 with a gloved finger. Then we end it. All of it. Holst leaned forward. And what? They're dead. Their boots are gone, Rowe said, but their eyes are still here, and I don't want them watching what comes next. Braun had mapped the last relay beacon, still active, half buried under a slag pile outside the southern flats. It was feeding data to a Kravari orbital satellite, automated, slow, barely functional. Hendricks laid out the cables, relinked the det pulse charges, and set the chain. A line of sealed fuel rods, rigged from decommissioned rig backups, seated under the old vapor tunnels, all pointed at the last relay spike. The trigger was buried in a pipe. Dal stood over it. Rowe gave the nod. Dal flipped the switch. The earth didn't shake. It peeled. A wave of heat and pressure split the dead soil, tearing through the crust in a straight line from Sector 12 to the southern rim. The vapor didn't rise. It burst. Thick columns of black and green, lit from beneath by combustion. The relay went up last, spiked into the sky like a shriek, then gone. The orbital feed went dark. No Kravari signal ever returned. They buried Ulak 2 days later, not out of respect, just to make sure the wind didn't uncover him again. They dropped his bones into a hollow rig well, covered them in slag, and welded a metal slab over the pit. Rowe himself etched the words into the plate. No ceremony. Just scratches and alloy. To those who taxed our breath. This is what it cost. No one spoke. Dal stood beside him. Then they walked away. A year passed. The storms eased. The vapor thinned. Where the trenches once ran, lines of coarse green crept between the wreckage. Spores and vine leaves, bred in sealed tanks from Dome 2's forgotten biolab. They weren't native. They weren't beautiful. But they were made for this, engineered to metabolize carbexite, to root and poison soil, to clean the air. They didn't need sunlight. They didn't fear acid. They grew, they spread, and they breathed. Eventually, the monitors changed. Toxicity dropped. Wind patterns stabilized. The air was still sharp, but not lethal. It was time to find out for sure. Hendricks stepped outside the dome first. Light mask, no filter pack. He waited 12 minutes. No cough, no sting. Then he waved the others out. Dal followed. Then Braun. Holst stayed behind. His lungs had scarred too deep. But Rowe walked out last. Helmet off. He pulled the mask from his belt. Didn't put it on. Just breathed. They bled for this air. And finally, it gave something back.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.